Stephanie White does a interview with a radio down there in Indiana. Pretty good interview.
What you are about to hear is the absolute loudest wake-up call in the history of professional women's basketball, and it all centers around a ruthless behind-the-scenes power grab that nobody saw coming. For months, the narrative surrounding the league was dominated by petty jealousy, bitter rivalries, and an old guard desperately trying to downplay the phenomenon that took over the sports world. But the moment the season ended, the entire script flipped in the blink of an eye. The executives, the veteran coaches, and the media talking heads who spent the summer telling fans to calm down are now the exact same people trampling over each other to cash in on the massive financial tidal wave. And sitting right at the center of this absolute storm is an explosive truth bomb just dropped by none other than Stephen A. Smith. He did not hold back, confirming what die-hard fans have been whispering about for weeks regarding the undeniable hypocrisy infecting the league's upper management. He exposed a staggering reality about Stephanie White, the Indiana Fever front office, and an entire establishment that is completely out of touch with its own audience. The desperation to seize the Caitlin Clark effect has officially spiraled out of control, and the boardroom maneuvers being executed right now are going to leave you absolutely speechless. But to truly understand the sheer magnitude of this hijacking, we have to rewind and look at the blood that was just spilled in the Fever's own locker room. The absolute shockwave that rattled the basketball world started with the sudden and brutally cold ousting of Christie Sides. Imagine taking a franchise that had been wandering in the absolute wilderness for nearly a decade, dragging them through a chaotic, high-pressure season, and successfully leading them back to the playoffs, only to be shown the door before the dust had even settled. For all her early season struggles, Sides had finally started to figure out how to utilize the greatest offensive weapon the college game had ever produced. The team was clicking, the chemistry was building, and the fan base was finally getting a taste of winning basketball after years of absolute misery. During the post-Olympic break, the Fever were playing some of the most electrifying basketball in the entire country, transforming into a legitimate offensive juggernaut that had veteran teams completely terrified. But the front office did not care about progress, and they certainly did not care about loyalty or the immense sweat equity Sides had put into the most highly scrutinized rookie season in sports history. The moment the Fever were eliminated by the Connecticut Sun, the executives realized they were sitting on a billion-dollar gold mine, and they abruptly decided that a blue-collar, grinding coach was simply not flashy enough for the bright lights. They needed a marquee name, someone who could stand at the podium, look like a mastermind, and effortlessly ride the coattails of a generational talent. The firing of Sides was a calculated business decision completely devoid of sentimentality, signaling that the Fever had transcended being a mere basketball team to become a global corporate brand. Yet, what happened next behind closed doors changes the entire story. Almost perfectly synchronized with the bloodletting in Indiana, a highly suspicious departure was unfolding halfway across the country. Stephanie White, a highly respected and wildly successful head coach, suddenly severed ties with the Connecticut Sun in a move that sent immediate shockwaves through the coaching fraternity. Now, if you look at this purely from a basketball perspective, the decision makes absolutely zero sense. White had built an absolute powerhouse in Connecticut, cultivating a roster filled with hardened veterans, dominant defenders, and players who were entirely bought into her gritty, defensive-minded system. They were perennial championship contenders, agonizingly close to bringing home a title after multiple deep playoff runs. So, why on earth would a coach walk away from a beautifully constructed, title-ready machine with elite players like Alyssa Thomas and DeWanna Bonner? The answer is as transparent as it is cynical, and it revolves entirely around the unprecedented spotlight brewing in the Midwest. White saw the exact same thing every opportunistic executive in the league saw. She recognized that winning a championship in Connecticut would bring her a nice trophy, but stepping into the head coaching role for the Indiana Fever would bring her international fame, unimaginable media coverage, and the keys to the most lucrative kingdom in all of women's sports. It was the ultimate parachute jump, timed perfectly to avoid the messy growing pains that someone else had already suffered through. The groundwork had already been laid. The brutal rookie initiation had already been endured. And now the table was perfectly set for someone new to swoop in and take all the glory. It was a calculated pivot that rubbed a lot of dedicated basketball purists the wrong way, setting the stage for a massive collision of egos. And just when you thought the dust had settled on this transparent power play, a massive truth bomb was dropped on national television. Stephen A. Smith, who had spent the entire summer going to war with his own colleagues over the blatant disrespect shown to the rookie sensation, took to the airwaves and completely dismantled the illusion. He confirmed what the most dedicated grassroots fans had known all along. The old guard is entirely out of touch with reality. Smith pointed out the staggering hypocrisy of a league that spent an entire year acting like they didn't need this new spotlight, only to suddenly rearrange their entire power structures just to get a piece of it. He specifically highlighted how coaches and executives, including the incoming regime for the Fever, are completely disconnected from the fans who actually built this massive new economy. During a fiery segment, he broke down how the WNBA establishment spent months trying to humble Clark, allowing physical altercations on the court, and turning a blind eye to the toxic narratives being spun by bitter veterans on podcasts. But the moment the season ended and the league secured a monumental new television deal, those exact same people suddenly wanted to be the ones steering the ship. Smith made it crystal clear that the incoming leadership is trying to seize the narrative, acting as if their veteran brilliance is the missing piece of the puzzle, when in reality, their only job is to get out of the way. He didn't hold back in his assessment of the sheer arrogance required to step into a situation created by a once-in-a-lifetime player and act as if the coaching staff is the main attraction. His rant tore the mask off the entire operation, exposing it as nothing more than a desperate scramble for relevance by people who initially looked down on the very phenomenon that is now paying their salaries. But the backlash was already brewing long before he even turned on his microphone. The moment the rumors of this orchestrated transition hit social media, the fan base erupted and the deep disconnect between the front office and the ticket buyers became glaringly obvious. The new wave of supporters, the ones who have shattered viewership records, bought out every jersey in existence and sold out arenas across the entire country, are fiercely loyal to the player who brought them there. They watched every brutal foul, every petty post-game comment, and every media gaslighting attempt throughout the summer with intense scrutiny. They saw how the established veterans and legacy coaches treated this rookie when she first arrived, treating her like an unwanted intruder rather than the savior of their financial ecosystem. So, when the news broke that an established veteran coach deeply tied to the league's old establishment was suddenly abandoning her elite team to come take over the Fever, the fans immediately smelled a rat. The comment sections and forums were flooded with accusations that this was nothing but a massive clout-chasing move. Fans openly questioned why the front office felt the need to bring in someone who represents the old guard rather than seeking out an innovative, forward-thinking offensive mind who could truly unlock the team's historic pace and space potential. The frustration is rooted in a deep-seated belief that executives are treating the fan base like they are entirely stupid. The front office believes that slapping a familiar, respected name on the head coaching door will legitimize the franchise in the eyes of the basketball purists, completely ignoring the fact that the new fan base absolutely despises the old guard. It is a massive miscalculation of public relations, proving that the people making the decisions in the boardroom are fundamentally out of touch with the very people buying their merchandise. And this disconnect unearths an even darker layer to the entire saga. This entire coaching carousel is the ultimate confirmation of the jealousy narrative that defined the entire 2024 season, validating every single fan who was called crazy for pointing it out. For months, media apologists tried to convince the public that there was no resentment, no bitterness, and no targeted animosity toward the new face of the league. They claimed that the hard hip checks, the exclusionary Olympic roster snubs, and the dismissive comments from former players were just normal competitive fire. But the sudden ruthless scramble to secure the head coaching job in Indiana completely shatters that convenient lie. If the rookie season was truly just business as usual, then an established, respected coach like White would never abandon a championship-caliber team just to take over a franchise that barely scraped into the first round of the playoffs. The reality is that the entire league knows exactly who holds the power, and their deep-seated jealousy has simply morphed into strategic opportunism. They couldn't humble her on the court, they couldn't break her spirit with physical intimidation, and they couldn't turn the media against her despite their best efforts. So, the new strategy for the old guard is remarkably simple. If you can't beat the phenomenon, you must find a way to become her boss. It is the ultimate ego trip for an establishment that refuses to let go of the steering wheel. The veterans want to stand on the sidelines, cross their arms, and take the credit when the team eventually makes a deep playoff run. They want the historical narrative to reflect that it was their veteran leadership, their steady hand, and their brilliant systemic adjustments that finally unlocked the championship potential. It is a blatant attempt to steal the spotlight and reassert dominance over a player whose organic popularity completely terrified the establishment from day one. But as this grand plan is being executed, the true motivation behind the madness is becoming impossible to ignore. At the end of the day, every single move being made in this high-stakes chess match comes down to pure, unadulterated financial greed and the pursuit of unprecedented corporate power. The league recently secured a monumental television rights deal worth billions of dollars, a tectonic shift in the financial reality of the sport. And the entire basketball world knows exactly whose face sold that massive package. The local broadcast rights, the massive corporate sponsorships, the sold-out season ticket packages, and the endless stream of merchandise sales have created a financial windfall that the Indiana franchise has never seen in its entire history. For a front office executive or a head coach, attaching yourself to this specific team is no longer just a career move. It is a golden ticket to generational wealth, unmatched leverage, and untouchable job security. The return of Kelly Krauskopf to the Fever's front office as the president of basketball operations and the subsequent aggressive clearing of the coaching staff was a brilliant, albeit completely ruthless, maneuver to control this massive cash flow. The executives realized that if they didn't act fast, the narrative would completely slip out of their hands, and the players would eclipse the organization itself. They are terrified of a scenario where the athletes hold all the leverage, dictating terms, and leaving the front office as nothing more than bystanders. By bringing in a heavy-hitting, established head coach, the front office is desperately attempting to build a firewall of authority. They want to ensure that the corporate sponsors and the television networks view the organization as a traditional, well-oiled machine run by respected veterans, rather than a chaotic traveling circus centered entirely around one spectacular player. It is a desperate attempt to corporatize a cultural phenomenon that was entirely organic. And they are clearly willing to burn any bridge and fire any loyal employee to secure the bag. But this high-wire act comes with a massive looming risk that could blow up in their faces. To truly grasp how precarious this situation is, you have to look at the massive psychological shift happening within the fan base itself. These are not the passive spectators of the past who simply clapped politely at fundamentally sound defensive rotations. This new era of fans operates with a fiercely protective mentality, acting almost like a digital army ready to go to war over any perceived slight against their star. When Stephen A. Smith took to the microphone and accused the establishment of being completely out of touch, he was directly channeling the anger of millions of people who feel like their intelligence is being insulted. The fans see Stephanie White's arrival not as a triumphant homecoming, but as an infiltration by the very establishment that tried to suppress their favorite player. They remember the podcast clips where veteran players scoffed at the idea of a rookie coming in and dominating. They remember the bizarre press conferences where coaches refused to acknowledge the reality of the impact being made on the court. So, when one of the most prominent figures of that exact same coaching fraternity suddenly parachutes into Indianapolis to take over, the immediate reaction is deep suspicion. The fans are terrified that the new coaching staff will attempt to reel in the fast-paced, Logo 3 shooting style that made the team so incredibly fun to watch in the second half of the season. They worry that the old-school mentality will prioritize rigid systemic control over individual brilliance, essentially putting a governor on a sports car just to prove who is driving. This isn't just a baseless fear. It is a direct reaction to the condescending tone the league has directed at these new fans for the past 12 months. And the pressure cooker is only getting hotter as the off-season drags on. The implications of this disconnect extend far beyond just the coaching staff. They strike at the very heart of how the entire franchise is structured moving forward. Consider the contract situation of Kelsey Mitchell, the incredibly talented veteran guard who was an absolute crucial piece of the Fever's late-season surge. The front office now has to navigate complex salary cap dynamics, unrestricted free agency, and roster construction while under the most intense microscope in the history of the sport. The fans want the roster optimized specifically to complement their generational point guard. They want rim-running forwards, knockdown shooters, and players who can catch impossibly fast transition passes without fumbling the ball out of bounds. But the fear is that an old guard coach like White, combined with an old guard executive like Krauskopf, will attempt to build a traditional, grit-and-grind roster that completely ignores the modern pace-and-space reality. If the front office prioritizes bringing in aging veterans who demand the ball in the half-court rather than athletic floor spacers who can run the floor, it will be the ultimate proof that Stephen A. Smith was entirely correct. It will prove that the egos in the boardroom are more concerned with doing things the right way according to the WNBA rulebook, rather than doing things the best way to maximize the generational talent they were gifted. The arrogance required to look at the most explosive offensive engine in the sport and say, "We need to slow this down," is staggering. Yet, It is exactly what the grassroots supporters are terrified is about to happen. And this fear is perfectly justified when you look at the historical precedent of how established sports leagues react to uncontrollable disruption. Every time a truly disruptive force enters a professional sports league, the immediate reaction of the establishment is to try and box it in. We saw it when the three-point revolution first began with old-school coaches calling it a gimmick right up until the moment it rendered their entire defensive philosophies obsolete. What we are witnessing in Indiana right now is the boardroom equivalent of that exact same defensive reflex. The executives and the legacy coaches are trying to put a corporate leash on a phenomenon that is wild, unpredictable, and vastly more popular than the league itself. Stephen A. Smith's explosive commentary was so resonant precisely because he understands the entertainment business better than anyone else in sports media. He recognizes that the fans are not tuning in to see a beautifully executed flex offense. They are tuning in to see magic. They want the deep threes, the flashy assists, and the undeniable swagger that completely breaks the traditional mold. When Smith calls the new regime out of touch, he is warning them that they are playing with fire. If they try to sanitize the product, if they try to make the star conform to their outdated ideas of how a rookie should behave, or how an offense should be run, they will alienate the massive audience that just single-handedly saved their league from financial irrelevance. The sheer audacity of the front office to think they can micromanage a cultural movement is breathtaking. And it sets the stage for what will undoubtedly be the most heavily scrutinized training camp in the history of female athletics. And the consequences of failure are absolutely apocalyptic. As the dust finally begins to settle on this unprecedented power play, the Indiana Fever are left standing on incredibly thin ice. They have successfully executed their ruthless boardroom takeover. They have fired the blue-collar coach who took all the bullets and did all the dirty work, and they have successfully cleared the path for the glossy, big-name hire who can stand in front of the cameras and soak up the glory. But in doing so, they have placed a target on their own backs the size of a billboard. Stephen A. Smith's blistering confirmation that these decision-makers are out of touch is not just a daily sports debate hot take. It is a grim, prophetic warning. The fans are watching every single move with intense, unforgiving skepticism. They know exactly why this coaching change happened. They know exactly what the underlying motives are, and they will absolutely not be easily fooled by polished corporate PR speak. If the new regime steps in and tries to force a rigid old-school system onto the most electrifying player in the sport, the backlash will be swift, brutal, and completely unrelenting.